But let's talk about the merits of the application here, and I really want you to give people a detailed overview of this. So let's begin at the beginning. Explain first the process of proscription of terror organizations in the UK. First, explain what it means if you're designated and how the designation happens.
Absolutely. I will go into detail. And what I would say is that if your viewers are interested in understanding this in as much detail as they want and can, the papers have been made available at a website called hamascase.com, and the pleadings are freely available to be downloaded. So those interested in talking about this very important conversation can go and read the documents for themselves. And it's a shame, as I said, that the right-wing media hasn't given space to discuss this, because it's important, right? I know a lot of people will disagree with the arguments that are being made there, but they're important arguments, and we need to have a respectful dialogue about this. As to the process, which is what you've asked me about, the Terrorism Act 2000 was a consolidation of precursor legislation that was trialled in the north of Ireland to deal with the issue of Irish republicanism, right? And the fact that there were a number of different groups that sought or fought what they said was a national liberation struggle. And the British invented this technique of designating those organizations terrorist organizations. And once the organization is so designated, it becomes a criminal offense to be a member. And so, I've talked a lot in the last week, well, in the last few decades, I talk about Bobby Sands all the time because he's a titanic figure, but he was caught by this sort of designation, right? So the idea is that you make the organization illegal, and then any of its members can be locked up for, I think it was 10 years under the precursor legislation, right? You get 10 years for membership of the IRA, it becomes quite difficult to be a member of the IRA, and that's the intended effect, all right? Now, that's as you might expect. I mean, the British state was fighting an army, what they said was an army, the Irish Republican Army. But in the case of Hamas, the British state is, of course, fighting Hamas, but it's not fighting it in Britain. It's fighting it in Palestine. The Act creates a number of offences that go beyond mere membership, right? You're not allowed to express support. You're not allowed to invite support. You're not allowed to attend a meeting. So what it does is the deliberate effect of the Terrorism Act is to make it extremely difficult to even talk about these organizations, much less be a member. And that's particularly problematic, of course, when, as in the case of Hamas, the organization has started winning elections. It forms not just the military wing, but the civil wing is deeply implicated in the administration of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza, and it just makes it extremely difficult to do anything with respect of, sending aid to Palestinians, talking to your political opponents. All of that stuff is being completely chilled. And I would say, just speaking plainly, I've received a lot of personal support, so have the other members of the legal team, a lot of private messages, a lot of people in the YouTube comments and so on. But the fact is that the people who oppose this application are free to talk very, very openly about it because their position is hegemonic, right? The British government is currently engaged alongside Israel in the mass murder of Palestinians because they're viewed as a racial threat to the racial purity of Israel's ethnostate. Whereas people who oppose that find it extremely difficult to speak up because they're worried that they'll literally be prosecuted. So the Act is operating as it's intended to, but this application is based upon, I would say, an extremely historically literate analysis of what it means to bring an end to a conflict as intractable as something like that which we see in Palestine. And those who are willing to engage with it in good faith might see a ray of hope of what a peaceful solution might look like, right? My client in the application, there's a witness statement by Dr. Marzouk, two witness statements, I should say, one much lengthier, which talks about the events of October 7th. And that witness statement goes into all kinds of details about what Hamas, both of those witness statements and the application in general go into Hamas's position. And one crucial thing they talk about is a hudna, right? This concept of an Islamic truce, a long Islamic truce, that it's a sort of religious, it's a religious transgression to break such a sacred truce. That's what Hamas are calling for. They're calling for a long-term ceasefire, and they are willing to do so on the basis of the 1967 borders. So all of that comes out in the application. It's just a shame that the right-wing press aren't interested in hearing what is actually said in that application. They're just interested in hitting me with stupid attack lines about how I did it for free or whatever.
Right. Let me ask you though about so you're explaining the proscription process, and you had in 2001, as I mentioned earlier, the Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, was designated under this law, And then 20 years later, you had Hamas as a political entity. And of course, Hamas, as you said, it's a political party. It's a social movement. It is certainly an armed resistance faction, but it also is an elected government since 2006 that has provided civil services, basic services in Gaza. I mean, in fact, one thing no one ever talks about, if you go back and look at public opinion polling in Gaza prior to October 7th, many of the gripes that people had in Gaza are similar to gripes that you hear about the government in London or New York or Berlin, because Hamas is not just a unidimensional entity, but the Home Secretary engaged in a kind of extreme version of what Paul Bremer called de-Baathification in Iraq, which was essentially anyone in any way connected to Hamas, even if you were a garbage collector, but you were working for Hamas, this makes you part of a proscribed terror organization. Talk about what that meant when at the time, I believe it was Priti Patel was the Home Secretary. When she made this designation, what was at play there?
Yes, that's a really helpful question. I suppose the starting point is to attack Priti Patel's credibility. I mean, it's not that it's difficult to do. She's obviously an extremely racist right-wing politician, and she was personally criticized even by her own colleagues for her dealings with the apartheid state of Israel, right? So she's a person who already lacks this credibility because she's shown herself to be such a staunch partisan of Zionism. Her reasoning for adding the political wing to the designated list has been staunchly criticized. She talks about anti-Semitism, and that's something that we address extensively in the application, right? She's trying to, and we're familiar with the way that these completely debased, utterly degraded definitions of anti-Semitism are used to attack anyone who supports Palestinian rights. So the familiar playbook. Her reasoning is ridiculous, and we explain why, and we do so in detail in the application. So that's part of the reasoning. And then part of it, as I tried to get into with this LBC chap, whose name I forget, he was saying something about, they're a threat to British people, right? Hamas are a threat to British people. So that's supposed to be part of the reasoning. And it's just obvious nonsense. It's completely ridiculous. I cannot stress enough how stupid that reasoning is. The point being made there.
Wait, are they saying, sorry to cut you off, because I think this is an important point. The argument would be that because there were British citizens who were killed on October 7th, that this exactly is relevant to the terror designation in the UK.
Well, the point is that they, when the British government tries, as it does so often, to argue that black is white, they sort of have to do these gymnastic reasoning, right? So part of the guidance and the principles that are supposed to constrain the discretion, right? Secretary of State has this extremely broad discretion to decide who she wants to add to the list, right? She could add the Ukrainian military if she wanted to. She could add the IDF if she wanted to. She absolutely could. There is no basis for doubting that, right? The definition of terrorism, there's a case called Crown and Gull. It's a Supreme Court case which talks about this very issue. And they were sort of saying in that case, they were exploring the way that, well, hold on, this guy was sharing videos of things that were taking place in armed conflict. And they were saying, well, hold on, the videos he's sharing are lawful under international humanitarian law. And I summarize or paraphrase, but the Supreme Court said, yeah, well, that doesn't matter. Like we accept the definition of terrorism in this act is extremely broad. It goes far beyond things that we accept are lawful under international humanitarian law, but we're going to allow it anyway because it's not a creature of international humanitarian law. It's a domestic prescription regime. Interesting to note in passing that case, Crown and Gull, the charges that the man was facing, Mr. Gull, one of them included sharing videos in relation to Palestine, and that was the one. If you go and read the judgment for the law nerds out there, you go and read the judgment. That's the one in relation to Palestine, where the prosecution wasn't actually successful because, well, the reasoning speaks for itself. So very, very broad definition. So the point is, she has this very broad discretion, the Secretary of State, and she could say, well, both sides of this conflict are committing terrorist acts. Clearly, both sides are caught by the definition. She could say, should I designate the ethnostate that views non-Jews as a racial threat and is enacting a genocide to the list of terrorist organizations, or should I add the group Hamas or some of the other groups? Should I add them to the list? And what's clear is that because the British government is participating in the genocide, right? So it's not just that they're complicit. Matt Kennard has been very good on this, right? They're not just complicit, they are participating. They're flying surveillance flights over from their Cyprus military bases. They're sending bombs. That's not complicity, that's participation. They're participating in a genocide. And so it's obvious why they chose to, with their very, very broad discretion, they said, right, let's apply it to Hamas. So that's part of the reasoning. The British point, I mean, to have a chance to actually respond without being cut off, the British point is just silly. It's like, the military wing, it doesn't make any sense to say that they pose a threat to people in Britain. They've never done any operations in Britain, and they've explicitly stated they have no intention of doing so. They confine their operations to the territory of historic Palestine. But the civilian wing, the political wing, poses a threat to people in Britain. That's just made up. It's complete nonsense. There's no basis for suggesting that that Hamas's political wing, let alone their military wing, to be honest, poses any threat to people in Britain. Now that's obviously different, and perhaps we can get into this later when we talk about the 10 British people who are facing prosecution or potential prosecution because they went to serve in the Israeli military while they committed genocide. So hopefully they will be prosecuted. I mean, it's like, what? So a British person goes to serve in a Israeli military while it commits a genocide because of their supposed God-given right to return there on the basis of their race. And then a Palestinian person exercises the Palestinian right to pick up guns, to use armed force to resist an occupier, exercises that right. Say they kill a British soldier who's serving or a British person who's serving in the Israeli military. By the Secretary of State's logic, it's somehow Hamas that's attacking Britain and not literally Britain attacking Hamas. It is black is white stuff. It's like, well, I think the emperor does have clothes. And it's like, with respect, I'm tired, and people are tired of being gaslit and being told that black is white. It's quite clear that Britain is participating in the genocidal mass murder of Palestinians, and the idea that it's Hamas that poses a threat to Britain is a disgusting disavowal of the naked reality that we've all seen on our phones and video screens these last 18 months.